Hello everyone, this is Avery Drake and this is my pitch presentation for our final project. So here is the client scenario. We have a recently retired couple named Mr. and Mrs. Brown. They're interested in practicing silvopasture on their recently purchased land in Wisconsin. Their family enjoys hunting and they plan to use the wooded area for deer hunting. And so the initial site objectives were to manage the woodland for deer hunting, use goats to manage the undergrowth and sell for meat production, and then use the woodland management practices such as tree thinning or fire to allow for forage growth. And then initially they also wanted to favor the white oak tree stands in the woodlands. Alright, here's some information on the actual site that they purchased. This is in Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin. 75 acres, 6 acres of ridgetop ag land, 15 acres of pasture, and 48 acres of woods. The farmhouse was built in the 1940s, and then there's an additional house right behind that house that was built in 1951. There is a large 490 pole building, multiple sheds, and 2 garages. A portion of the property is fenced, and there is a supply line underground for water. Here is the history of the site. It has not been on the market in decades, and the pasture has been rented for hay during this time. Early 1850s, settlers came to the Kickapoo River in Crawford County. They were inspired by the abundant amount of groves of white pines, and so they called their village the Pine Grove. And then these early settlers grew wheat, and then that shifted to dairy farming, and then tobacco also became a popular crop. So this is the initial plan or goals that I had for the couple based on their scenario and what they wanted. So the first one would be manage the forest health by tree thinning and fire, and then create a woodland silvopasture system with goats as the livestock. The goats would be used to keep that understory grazed in a very intense rotational grazing system, and then the white oaks would be favored in the stand, so those would be the ones that would be left alone for timber production. And then keeping all of this in mind, this is what I needed to look at on Web Soil Survey to see if this was even possible. Will this plan be possible with the conditions of the wooded areas? Alright, so I went into and looking in the actual characteristics of the land, which includes the wooded area and the pasture land. And the risk included many different things. The slopes of the wooded area along the rocky surface would make the land hard to manage and change. Fence posts would be hard to install, which would be needed if we were going to graze the goats out there. And tree thinning would be difficult. Machinery may not be able to reach the trees, and the wooded area is poorly suited for logging or for log landing. And then the assets, all of them were in the actual pasture land. So the pasture land is not as rocky as the wooded area. They got some loams going on, silt or sand. It's less sloped. It is suited for mechanical preparation and mechanical timber harvest. This is a specific chart from Web Soil Survey. The wind erodibility index is a numerical value indicating the soil's susceptibility to wind erosion, or the tons per acre per year that can be expected to be lost to wind erosion. So those are all the different types of soils on the land, and the pasture is moderately eroded, and the wind erodibility index is high for all of them, very high for a couple. And but all of this can be changed with the right type of farming management. I would also like to mention the boxes I have here. So the yellow boxes, the Bilson Sandy Loam and the Windward Loamy Fine Sand, which is moderately eroded. Those are the two types of soils that are next to the residence. So that's the pasture land next to the residence, and I have that pictured. And then the red box is showing the silt loams, which are both moderately eroded, of that ag land that is on the other side of the wooded area. And I have a picture of that on the next slide. So here's a picture of that ag land that is behind the wooded area. This ag land is the yellow box on that picture. And this is in addition to the pasture that is next to the barn and the residence, which is the blue box. It is still moderately eroded, but the soil composition is more silty than sandy, which is the composition of the soil next to the residence is a little bit more sandy. But they both have very good potential to be used and managed for a silvopasture system. With all that in mind, with everything that I've shown about all the bad characteristics of that wooded area, this is what would be the best option to me for the couple to do. They should utilize that pasture land and that ag land to set up a silvopasture system. So, goat silvopasture with shortleaf pines. These are the goals that will go along with the goat silvopasture with the loblolly pines. So the first goal will be to stay within budget, that $75,000 that they have for initial costs, and those initial costs will include goat purchases, forage seed purchase, fencing the paddock system, and the cost of tree planting. The second goal is to protect the soil from erosion with planted forages. The third goal will be to fulfill the long-term benefits of the loblolly pine timber production. This system will have a final timber harvest in the 26th year with a thinning in the 16th year. And then the fourth goal is to raise boar goats to produce profits before the 5th year from the start of the silvopasture system. Ideally, Mr. and Mrs. Brown will break even on goat production by the 3rd year. Okay, so for this cultivated silvopasture system, the Browns will have to purchase 24 boar goats, which is a carrying capacity of 8 goats per acre. The goats will be purchased at 8 months of age, and they will be rotationally grazed in a paddock system made up of about 5 fenced areas. And the rotation will be each paddock will have 1 week of grazing and then 4 weeks off as the goats rotate to different paddocks. And then the paddocks will have these loblolly pines planted, and so the plantings will be 7 feet apart in rows, and then there'll be 30 feet between each row. And the plan would also include thinning at 16 years of age when the loblolly pines are 16 years old, and then again the final cut will be on the 26th year. And then the actual pastures will have switchgrass and Indiana grass, which are natives to Wisconsin, but eventually there will be shade created because those trees are going to grow up and they're going to create shade, just like you can see in that image. So the Browns will also have to purchase a cold season grass combination, which will be ryegrass and tall fescue. They're both perennials, and those will be sown 45 days before the first frost, probably around the 12th year of the tree production. So here are the Browns' transition plan. This is what they will be doing every season for the first 5 years, and then so on. Basically, every fall, there will be a breeding season, and then after the first year, they should sell their juveniles in the fall every year. And in the spring, they will do soil tests, check the erosion, see if there needs to be any fertilizer added to the soil for the trees, and they will also have kiddings every spring. All right, these are the management practices that the Browns will have to do every year, and each one will be done in a specific time of year. I've talked about most of these. Some of the goat ones are just what you have to do to manage goats to keep them healthy and growing. And the one that I wanted to point out is the one where I said survey the land for any bare spots, forage availability. So the land will also have to be checked to see how well the forage is growing, and if it's not, there will have to be some additional planting of forages just in case the goats are eating it too fast, or certain weather conditions are just not allowing for the right amount of growth. So that will definitely have to be checked every year. So here is our basic economic summary, and this silvopasture system will be a 26-year project to give the trees an efficient amount of time to mature. A thinning will happen at year 16, and then the final cut will happen year 26. And I have down the Layham logging and firewood supply as the loggers. And then additionally, the goats will kid every year in the spring, and juveniles will be sold the next year. The number of goats sold each year will vary depending on how many kids are born in the herd and how many juveniles will be kept. And the females will be retired after 9 years. And to operate and sustain the system properly, certain equipment and supplies will be needed, which will contribute to the startup cost. This will include the ground cover, the loblolly seed, the fencing, the goats, a seeder, and the logging services. And the goats will be sold at the Fenimore Livestock Exchange Incorporation in Wisconsin. All right, we've made it to the conclusion. So while Mr. and Mrs. Brown wanted to manage the wooded area of their purchased land, it just didn't seem feasible with the amount of unsuitable factors of the soil. It was too rocky and not flat enough to manage. However, silvopasture can still be practiced on their 15 to 20 acres of pasture. The goats will supply a very supplemental income every year with juvenile sales, and the animals will also live happy, full lives by grazing the forage and the unwanted weeds in the planted pine tree plantations. The pine trees will be a waiting game, but a great profit will be gained in the future for their sons and their families. And as for deer hunting, the woods will still attract plentiful numbers of white-tailed deer. The hunting seasons will be a busy time for the Browns as their family members come to hunt and stay at Grandma and Grandpa's goat farm.